The vibration against the mahogany desk wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the campaign war room, it sounded like a gunshot. 3 a.m., the hour when political careers usually die. I stared at the phone, the screen lighting up the darkened office. The name Quinn brought a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the room's temperature and everything to do with the memory of her hands tangling in my hair just hours ago. But when I answered, her voice wasn't the sultry whisper from the night before. It was professional, cold, and edged with terror. I have the ledger, Alex, the one you said didn't exist, and I'm running the story in 20 minutes. The taste of bile rose in my throat, colliding violently with the lingering memory of her perfume. I gripped the desk, the wood biting into my palm. Flashback 24 hours. The senator's re-election fundraiser was in full swing, a cavernous ballroom dripping in gold leaf and desperation. The sensory overload was immediate. The aggressive clinking of crystal, the drone of rehearsed speeches, the suffocating scent of expensive lilies that always reminded me of funerals. My role was simple: be the architect of the clean image, managing the room with practiced detachment. I was the invisible hand, ensuring the donors felt important and the secret stayed buried under layers of charm and canapes. I navigated the floor like a shark in a koi pond, smiling until my jaw ached, deflecting inquiries about the polling dip in the Midwest with a wave of my hand and a fresh drink. Then I saw her. Standing near the press pen, Quinn looked less like a journalist and more like a deliberate disruption. She wore an emerald velvet suit that seemed to absorb the light, sharp and soft all at once. No tie, just the suggestion of skin at her collar that drew the eye. She wasn't taking notes. She was watching me. I moved to intercept, sliding through the crowd with the ease of someone who knew where all the bodies were buried. "Miss Quinn," I said, stopping close enough to breach the professional barrier. "I didn't think this was your scene. Not enough blood in the water." She turned, and the impact of her gaze was physical. Her eyes tracked my mouth, unflinching, before meeting my gaze. "I'm not here for the blood, Alex. I'm here for the spin." She held the champagne flute loosely, her fingers long and deliberate against the glass. The tension coiled tight between us, immediate and magnetic. It was professional animosity, layered over something much more dangerous. The air thickened, charged with the kind of electricity that usually precedes a storm. I felt exposed, seen in a way that my job usually prevented. "You're wasting your time," I said, keeping my voice low. "The senator is clean." Quinn stepped closer, and the air between us shifted, heavy with unspoken challenges. "Everyone has a leak, Alex. You just have to find the pressure point." Her proximity was a weapon. I could smell her, sandalwood and rain, a scent that cut through the cloying lilies. My guard dropped, raw and immediate. I should have walked away. I should have called security. Instead, I leaned in, drawn by a gravity I couldn't name. "Is that a threat?" I asked. Quinn smiled, and it wasn't the polite smile of a reporter wanting a quote. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what I was hiding. "It's an invitation. Give me 10 minutes. Background interview. Off the record." She paused, her eyes darkening, scanning my face like she was reading a map. "Somewhere we can actually hear ourselves think. I want to know who you are when you're not reciting talking points." The request was a breach of protocol. It was a risk I couldn't afford. But looking at the line of her throat, the way the velvet jacket framed her collarbones, the pull was undeniable. The campaign logic in my brain screamed no, but the rest of me was already moving. "The hotel bar," I said, the words slipping out before I could check them. "It's quiet. No cameras." "Lead the way," she murmured. As we walked away from the safety of the public eye, leaving the noise of the ballroom for the shadows of the hotel corridor, I felt the shift. We were crossing a line. I just didn't know how far the fall would be. The hotel bar was a sanctuary of shadow and expensive silence, a stark contrast to the gold-leafed chaos we'd left behind. It was dimly lit, the kind of darkness that encourages secrets, with deep leather banquettes that swallowed you whole, and the low hum of jazz that required you to lean in close just to be heard. We chose a booth in the far corner, away from the few other patrons nursing their scotches. I slid into the leather seat, the material cool against my back, while Quinn sat opposite me. The distance across the small mahogany table felt simultaneously vast and non-existent. She didn't pull out a recorder. She didn't even reach for a notebook. Instead, she ordered 2 whiskeys, neat, her voice low and smooth as it gave the order to the waiter. When the drinks arrived, the amber liquid catching the faint light, the dynamic shifted. The investigative journalist vanished, replaced by someone far more dangerous. A woman who was genuinely listening. "So," she said, picking up her glass. The condensation slicked her fingers. "Tell me about the cost, Alex. Not the campaign budget, the personal cost." I reached for my own drink, needing the burn of the alcohol to steady my hands. "There is no personal cost. It's the job. We serve at the pleasure of the senator." "Spin," she murmured, setting her glass down with a soft click. "That's the press release answer. I want the truth. You look exhausted. You look like you haven't slept in a month." I looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and devoid of the judgment I was used to. The defense mechanisms I'd spent 15 years perfecting began to fracture. "Sleep is a luxury," I admitted, my voice dropping. "It's not just the hours, it's the noise. It never stops. You forget what silence sounds like." "I know," she said. Her hand moved across the table, not touching me yet, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her skin. "You forget who you are when nobody's watching." The air thickened, charged with a tension that made it hard to breathe. I watched her fingers trace the rim of her glass, a slow, deliberate circle that hypnotized me. The scent of her, that grounding mix of sandalwood and rain, drifted across the table, wrapping around me like a physical weight. It was intoxicating. "I don't think anyone's watching now," I whispered. "No," she agreed. Her gaze dropped to my lips, then back up to my eyes, unflinching. "Just us." Under the table, her knee brushed against mine. It was a light contact, barely a graze, but it sent a shockwave through me that nearly made me spill my drink. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. I should have pulled back. I should have made a joke and reestablished the professional boundary. But the pull was undeniable. Instead of retreating, I shifted my leg, increasing the pressure, leaning into the contact. Quinn's expression didn't change, but her pupils dilated, swallowing the iris. "Stop spinning, Alex," she said softly. "Stop pretending you don't feel this." "This is a mistake," I whispered, though I made no move to leave. "I'm not writing this down," she countered. Her hand finally closed the distance, her fingers brushing against my wrist. Her touch was cool, firm, and electric. "And you're not a story right now." The space between us seemed to collapse. I leaned forward, drawn by a gravity that defied all my carefully calculated logic. "And if I do?" "Then do something about it." I didn't think. I just moved. I leaned across the table, closing the final inches, and when my mouth found hers, it wasn't tentative. It was a collision. Her lips were soft, tasting of whiskey and danger, and the kiss deepened immediately, a sultry confirmation of everything the silence had promised. Her hand moved up to cut my jaw, her thumb tracing my cheekbone, anchoring me in the moment. It was messy and desperate and completely reckless. We broke apart, breathless, the reality of what we'd just done crashing down. But the regret didn't come, only the need for more. "Room 412. She whispered against my mouth. We stood up, leaving the untouched drinks and the wreckage of my career on the table. The elevator ride up was agonizing, the silence heavy with anticipation. We didn't touch, but the reflection in the brass doors showed 2 people standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump. When the doors opened, I followed her out, knowing there was no going back. Waking up felt like surfacing from deep water too quickly, a sharp, disorienting gasp for air. The hotel curtains were cheap, too thin to hold back the aggressive glare of the city morning. A blade of white sunlight cut across the bed, dissecting the space between us. I squinted against the brightness, the dull throb of a whiskey headache pulsing behind my eyes. I turned over, the movement slow and heavy. Quinn was still asleep. In the unforgiving light of day, stripped of the emerald velvet armor and the dim mystique of the bar, she looked deceptively innocent. Her dark hair was a chaotic spill of ink against the white pillowcase, softening the sharp angles of her face. One arm was thrown carelessly over her head, exposing the vulnerable line of her wrist. I watched the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, remembering the way that skin had felt against mine only hours ago. The heat, the friction, the desperate, unpolished need. For a dangerous second, I let myself just want this. To stay in this suspended reality, where the only polling numbers that mattered were the cadence of her breathing. But reality is a persistent creditor. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, silenced but relentless. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. Urgent emails from the campaign manager, frantic texts from the press secretary. The war room was already awake. I slipped out of the tangle of sheets, the cold air hitting my skin like a judgment. Dressing was a mechanical act, reassembling my professional shell piece by piece. I couldn't wake her. I didn't have the words for this, for the awkward transition from lovers to adversaries. Instead, I grabbed a piece of hotel stationery and scribbled a hasty note. Call me. I left it on the pillow next to her hand, a weak promise in a room full of unspoken complications. The transit to campaign headquarters was a blur of anxiety. The city was loud, indifferent to the seismic shift in my personal tectonic plates. I walked into the building, flashing my badge at security, trying to ignore the way my skin still hummed with the memory of her touch. The elevator ride up to the war room felt like an ascent to the gallows. When the doors opened, the noise hit me. A wall of ringing phones, shouting interns, and the low, constant drone of cable news. It was the sound of my life, but today, it sounded like a warning. I made a beeline for my office, needing the sanctuary of my data. But Marcus, my senior aide, intercepted me. He looked pale, his usually immaculate tie loosened, sweat beading on his upper lip. "Alex," he hissed, grabbing my arm. "We have a code red." "We always have a code red, Marcus. Is it the Ohio numbers?" "No, it's the drive, the encrypted backup, the one with the dark money index." I stopped dead. The noise of the room fell away. "What about it?" "It's not in the safe. The logs show you checked it out yesterday. You never checked it back in." The blood drained from my face. "I have it. It's in my bag." I rushed into my office, slammed the door, and upended my satchel onto the desk. Laptop, charger, mints, lipstick. But the silver flash drive, the digital ledger that linked the senator to an offshore syndicate, was gone. My mind raced backward. The bar, the booth. The bag was under the table. Quinn was the only one. She hadn't just seduced me. She had dismantled me. The empty bag screamed the truth. Then the phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. I stared at the screen. Quinn. The name that had been a prayer the night before was now a verdict. I reached for the phone, my hand shaking, the taste of bile rising in my throat. This was it. The silence was over. The wind on the roof of the parking structure was biting, whipping my hair across my face like a lash. It was a desolate expanse of gray concrete and oil stains, utterly exposed to the slate gray sky. I pushed through the heavy metal door, the rusty hinges screaming in protest, my heart hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. I expected to see Quinn triumphant, holding my career hostage with a smirk, reveling in the destruction of the strategist who thought she was untouchable. Instead, I found a woman about to shatter. Quinn was standing near the ledge, clutching a manila folder to her chest as if it were a shield. She wasn't wearing the emerald suit. She was in jeans and a coat that looked too big, her face pale and drawn, stripped of the armor she'd worn in the ballroom. I stormed across the distance. "You played me," I shouted over the wind. "The bar, the hotel, it was just a distraction to get into my bag." "I didn't steal it." Quinn shoved a folder toward me, her hands shaking violently. "I didn't even know you had it until this arrived this morning. Anonymous source. But the return address is a shell company linked to your senator's security." I stared at the folder. "Why would they send it to you?" "Because they're setting us up," she hissed. "Open it." I snatched the folder, fingers numb. Inside wasn't the clean, organized ledger I knew. It was photos. Grainy, surveillance-style photos that made my stomach turn. Rusted shipping containers in a port I didn't recognize. Rows of young women with hollow eyes. Timestamps matching the senator's diplomatic trips to Southeast Asia. And a transaction log linking the offshore accounts I managed directly to a known international trafficking syndicate. The air left my lungs. "This isn't just fraud," I whispered, the bile returning. "This is..." The words stuck in my throat, a jagged thing too heavy and too horrific to speak. "Slavery," Quinn finished, her voice hollow. "He's not just taking dirty money, Alex. He's moving people. And he used your clean accounts, the ones you set up, to launder the payments." I looked at her, horror washing over me. "I didn't know. You have to believe me. I thought it was just standard corruption." "I know," she said. She reached out, her hand hovering near my arm, then grounding me with a firm grip. "That's why I called. If I run this story, you go down as the architect. You're the signatory on every account. He set you up as the fall guy, the perfect, ambitious shield." I looked into her eyes, searching for the lie, for the manipulation I was so used to seeing in my world. But there was only fear, and a fierce, terrifying honesty. The attraction that had pulled us together in the bar flared again, sharp and undeniable even here. "Why warn me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You could have just published. You could have won a Pulitzer." "Because," she stepped into my space, her breath hitching. "Because of last night. Because I don't destroy the people I..." She hesitated, the wind whipping her dark hair across her face, hiding her eyes for a fractured second. "The people I care about." "Alex," she whispered, her tone changing instantly. "Look down, the street level." I followed her gaze. 3 black SUVs were idling at the entrance of the garage. I knew those cars. I knew the tint on the windows. It wasn't the press. "Voss," I said, the name tasting like ash. "The senator's head of security. They aren't here to arrest us." "No, they're here to clean up loose ends." "My car's on the 4th level," Quinn said, grabbing my hand. "It's a piece of junk, but it's fast." "Drive," I said. "I know the grid." We ran toward the only chance we had left. The stairwell swallowed the sound of our footsteps. We burst onto the 4th level, lungs burning, just as the squeal of tires echoed from the ramp below. Voss's team was moving up. Quinn didn't hesitate. She shoved me toward a dented gray sedan that looked like a relic from a different decade, fumbling with her keys. "Get in," she snapped, the terror in her voice replaced by a sharp, jagged focus. I threw myself into the passenger seat. The engine coughed once, a hesitation that stopped my heart, before roaring to life. We peeled out of the spot seconds before the black grille of an SUV crested the ramp. Quinn didn't look back. She slammed the accelerator, weaving through the concrete pillars with a reckless precision that made my stomach drop. We hit the exit ramp doing 60, merging into the chaotic mid-morning traffic of the city I thought I owned. "Where are we going?" Quinn's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Her profile was rigid, a statue carved from panic. "North," I said, my voice sounding foreign in the small space. "Get off the main artery, take the underpass at 4th. That adds 20 minutes. "That avoids the traffic cams I authorized last year," I countered. "Voss has access to the grid. If we stay on the highway, we're flagged in 3 minutes. If we take the surface streets through the industrial district, we're ghosts." She glanced at me then, a quick, assessing look that stripped away the panic and left something raw. "You built the cage," she said, swerving onto the exit ramp. "And now I'm showing you the loose bars. Drive." The silence in the car was heavy, pressing against the windows. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the static of unsaid things. The betrayal, the lie of the bar, the heat of the hotel room. The city thinned out, replaced by the skeletal remains of factories and eventually the encroaching green of the tree line. I watched her hands on the wheel. Long fingers, capable and steady despite the situation. The memory of those fingers on my skin was a phantom sensation. I wanted to be furious. I wanted to hate her for the deception, for making me a pawn in her crusade. But the anger was inextricably tangled with the adrenaline and the undeniable pull of her proximity. "The cabin," I said after an hour, the city a smudge of gray in the rearview mirror. "It's up the ridge, left at the fork. It's a Shell property. Nobody knows it exists except the Shell Corporation's lawyer, and he's been dead for 2 years." Quinn took the turn, the tires crunching over gravel. The isolation settled around us, the dense pines blocking out the sky. When she finally killed the engine in front of the small, weathered structure, the sudden silence was deafening. The adrenaline crash left me shaking. We scrambled out, the cold mountain air biting through my thin blouse. The cabin was freezing, smelling of dust and neglect, but it had walls. Quinn locked the door behind us, the click of the deadbolt loud in the stillness. She turned to me, her eyes wide and searching. The professional distance she'd worn in the car evaporated. "Are you hurt?" She didn't wait for an answer. She moved into my space, her hands hovering before settling on my shoulders. Her touch was firm, grounding, mapping the tension in my muscles. "I'm fine," I lied. My hands were trembling so hard, I had to clench them into fists. "You're shaking." She stepped closer, invading the space I tried to maintain. Her scent, sandalwood and the faint metallic tang of fear, filled my senses. She ran her hands down my arms, checking for injuries I might have missed in the flight. It was a medical assessment, clinical and necessary, but my body didn't interpret it that way. Every brush of her palm sent a fresh spike of heat through the cold. "I'm not hurt, Quinn, just terrified," she finished for me. Her gaze held mine, unflinching. "Me too." She didn't let go. Her hands stayed on my arms, anchoring me to the floorboards, to the moment, to her. The betrayal was still a jagged edge between us, but the shared danger was a stronger bond. We were two targets in the middle of nowhere, and for the first time since the phone rang, I realized that the only thing standing between me and the end of everything was the woman who had started it all. "We need to see what's on the drive," she whispered, the distance between our mouths shrinking. "We need to know exactly what we're dying for." The blue glow of the laptop screen was the only light in the cabin, casting long, skeletal shadows against the exposed timber walls. We sat side by side at the small, scarred wooden table, our thighs pressed together not out of desire, but out of necessity. Or maybe that was just the lie I told myself to keep my hands steady. The cold of the unheated room bit at my exposed skin, but where Quinn touched me, even inadvertently, I was burning. "Here," I whispered, my finger trembling as I pointed to a column of figures. The Blue Heron Initiative. It was supposed to be a wetlands preservation grant. I wrote the press release myself. I spun it as a legacy project. Quinn leaned in, her hair brushing against my cheek, smelling of rain and the stale fear of the car ride. She didn't look at the numbers. She looked at the metadata I had decoded. "That's not wetlands, Alex. Look at the routing numbers. That's a recurring payment to a logistics firm in the Port District. I've been tracking them for months." Her voice vibrated against my shoulder, low and devastating. "They don't move cargo. They move people. Blue Heron isn't a legacy project. It's a holding facility." The synergy was terrifyingly seamless. I was the translator of the code, she was the historian of the sin. I would highlight a complex web of transfers through the Caymans, and she would match it to a date, a disappearance, a tragedy I had spun into a non-story. The horror of it wasn't just the corruption, it was the scale. It was massive, a sprawling industrial machine of misery that I had unknowingly greased with every press release and every donor dinner. "I did this," I choked out. "I made the money invisible so he could do this. I'm not a strategist, I'm an accomplice." Quinn stepped into my space, her hands finding my waist. "Alex, look at me." I shook my head, but she cut my face, forcing me to meet her eyes. "You didn't know. You were the tool, not the hand that swung it. And now you're the one dismantling it." Her defense broke something open. The guilt was eclipsed by a sudden, desperate need for connection, for something real to anchor me in the nightmare. I leaned into her touch, gripping the lapels of her coat. "Make me forget," I breathed. "Just for a minute." Her eyes darkened, the pupils swallowing the iris. "Okay." She kissed me, and it wasn't like the bar. It wasn't a game. It was slow, deep, and consuming. She backed me against the rough wood of the cabin wall, her body a shield against the cold. Her hands moved under my jacket, finding the heat of my skin through my blouse, her fingers tracing the line of my spine with a possessive weight. The sensory relief was overwhelming. The friction of denim, the softness of her lips, the way her breath hitched when I tangled my fingers in her hair. For a moment, the senator, the ledger, the trafficking, it all dissolved into the simple, sultry reality of her weight against me. We were two people standing on the edge of the abyss, choosing to look at each other instead of the fall. Then, the world shattered. It wasn't a phone call this time. It was a sound that cut through the heavy breathing and the quiet dark. The distinct, slow crunch of tires rolling over gravel outside. The crunch of heavy tires rolling over gravel killed the intimacy instantly. We froze, bodies still pressed together, but the sultry heat that had filled the room evaporated, replaced by a sharp, freezing dread. I pulled away from Quinn, the loss of contact hitting me like a physical blow, and moved to the window. Peering through the crack in the dusty curtains, I saw the nightmare manifest. The darkness outside was broken by the aggressive glare of headlights. 3 black SUVs formed a tactical semicircle around the cabin, their high beams cutting through the mountain mist like searchlights. Men were exiting the vehicles, not police, not FBI. They wore tactical gear but no badges. Private military contractors. Fixers. And standing in front of the lead vehicle, illuminated by the harsh white light, was Voss. He looked bored, checking his watch like he had a dinner reservation to get to, utterly unbothered by the fact that he was about to sanction a murder. "He didn't bring the police," I whispered. Quinn moved beside me, her hand finding the small of my back. The cabin's ancient landline suddenly shrieked, echoing off the wooden walls like a scream. I looked at Quinn. Her face was pale, but her eyes were hard, calculating. "Answer it," she murmured. "Buy us time." I picked up the receiver, the plastic cold against my ear. "Voss." "Alex." His voice was smooth, warm even. It was the same reassuring tone he used when explaining to a donor why a scandal was actually a strategic opportunity. "I was hoping you'd be reasonable. It's cold out here, and I'd hate to make a mess of such a charming rustic getaway." "What do you want?" "I want to offer you an exit strategy," Voss said. "The senator values your loyalty, Alex. He believes this lapse in judgment is temporary. Step out of the cabin, bring the drive. You walk away with the ambassadorship to France we discussed last month. A clean slate, a fresh start." "And Quinn?" I asked, my eyes locking with hers across the dim room. "Miss Quinn is a liability," Voss said, his tone shifting slightly, losing the warmth. "She has illegal possession of classified materials. She'll be handled. Quietly. She disappears, you go to Paris. It's a generous trade." I looked at Quinn. She was watching me, her breath shallow. She knew what he was offering. She understood the calculus of power better than anyone. Paris, safety, my career back, scrubbed clean. All I had to do was open the door and let the monster eat the woman who had just kissed me against the wall. I took a breath, channeling every ounce of spin doctor training I had. I needed to keep him talking. I needed him to think I was still the cold, pragmatic strategist he hired. "France isn't enough," I said into the phone, my voice steady. "Not for what I know. If I walk out there, I want the chief of staff position. And I want immunity, in writing." Quinn's eyes widened in betrayal. Then she saw my hand. I was pointing frantically at the phone cord. She moved quickly, pulling a small device from her pocket, a digital recorder, and holding it to the receiver. Voss laughed, a dry, scratching sound. "Always negotiating. That's why we like you, Alex. Fine. Chief of staff. Just come out." "I need a minute," I said, "to get the drive." "You have 30 seconds, Voss replied. "Then we start burning things." The line went dead. I hung up, my hand shaking violently. "Did you get it?" I asked. Quinn nodded, hitting stop. "Bribery, conspiracy, intent. We have him. But he has 20 men with assault rifles outside." "We upload it," Quinn said, grabbing the laptop. "If this hits the wire, he can't touch us." Crash. The window next to the fireplace exploded inward. A canister skittered across the floor, hissing smoke. "Time's up," Voss's voice echoed from outside. "We have to move," I screamed, grabbing the drive. "Back door, now!" We weren't negotiating anymore. We were running for our lives, and the only weapon we had was a laptop, looking for a signal. The screen of the laptop was a glowing blue tombstone in the darkness. No signal. The cabin, buried deep in the valley's shadow, was a digital dead zone. I slammed the lid shut, shoving the computer into my satchel, along with the orange emergency case I'd ripped from the wall near the door. "The ridge," I gasped, the smoke from the canister already stinging my eyes. "We need altitude. The cell tower's on the other side of the peak." Quinn didn't ask questions. She grabbed my hand, her grip bruising and desperate, and we bolted into the tree line just as the front door of the cabin was kicked in. The woods were a chaotic blur of shadows and violence. Branches whipped against our faces, tearing at skin and clothes, invisible hands trying to hold us back. The ground was slick with damp pine needles and mud, treacherous footing that turned every step into a gamble. Behind us, the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots on the forest floor was getting louder. They weren't running with panic. They were hunting with precision. My lungs burned, the cold air tearing at my throat like swallowed glass. Every muscle in my legs screamed for me to stop, to surrender, to accept the deal Voss had offered. But then I felt the pull of Quinn's hand, the fierce determination in her stride as she dragged me upward, and I kept moving. We weren't just running away from death. We were running toward the truth. We crested the ridge, the trees thinning out to reveal the jagged spine of the mountain against the night sky. I fumbled for the laptop, my fingers numb and clumsy. Quinn pulled out her phone, holding it up like a beacon. 1 bar, she shouted, the wind snatching the words from her mouth. I have a signal. Upload it, I screamed, dropping to my knees in the dirt to open the satchel. But before I could pull the laptop free, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. Voss. He had anticipated the route. He wasn't winded. He wasn't messy. He stood between us and the sky, a silhouette of absolute control. End of the road, Alex, he said, stepping forward. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't need to. The threat was in his posture, the casual way he closed the distance. Give me the drive. Quinn stepped in front of me, shielding my body with hers. You'll have to go through me. That was the plan, Voss snarled. He lunged. The struggle was messy and desperate. It wasn't the choreographed violence of cinema. It was a frantic collision of bodies in the mud. Voss hit Quinn hard, a backhand that sent her sprawling into the brush. He turned to me, his hand closing around my throat, lifting me off my feet. The world narrowed to the pressure on my windpipe and the cold indifference in his eyes. You should have taken Paris, he whispered. My hands scrabbled in the open satchel, fingers brushing past the cool metal of the laptop until they found the textured plastic grip of the flare gun from the emergency kit. I didn't aim. I didn't think. I just jammed the barrel into the space between us and pulled the trigger. The explosion was blinding. A magnesium star erupted at chest height, a searing white heat that tore through the darkness. Voss screamed, releasing me as he stumbled back, clutching his face, temporarily blinded by the flash and the searing heat. I scrambled backward, grabbing the laptop. Quinn, now! Quinn snatched the phone, tethered it to the computer. The screen lit up. Uploading. Voss was recovering, blinking tears from his eyes. Kill them, he shouted to the men cresting the ridge. Bullets chewed up the dirt inches from my boots. I curled over the laptop. Voss raised his weapon, the barrel leveling at my chest. Sent. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, a sound cut through the wind. A ping. Then another. A cascade of notifications erupted from Voss's pocket and the phones of the men behind him. The AP wire alert. Voss froze. He looked at his phone. He knew the game was over. The evidence was in the cloud. Killing us now wouldn't clean the mess. It would just add 2 bodies to a federal indictment. He looked at me, his expression shifting from murderous to calculating. He holstered his weapon. Fall back, he commanded, his voice flat. But sir, one of the men started. It's done, Voss snapped. We leave, now. He turned and vanished into the dark, a professional knowing when the contract was void. We sat in the dirt, bruised, bleeding, and shivering, listening to the engines fade away down the mountain. The sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and gold. I looked at the laptop screen. The upload complete message was still blinking. We had burned it all down. And we were still here. 6 months later, the silence in the apartment wasn't heavy. It was just quiet. It was the kind of quiet I used to pay thousands of dollars a night to find in high-end hotels. But now it came free with the lease of a 3rd-floor walk-up in a city where nobody cared about polling data. The Beltway was 1,000 miles east, and the frantic rhythm of the campaign trail felt like a fever dream I had finally broken. I stood by the window, nursing a mug of coffee that was too hot, watching the rain blur the streetlights below into a watercolor painting of grays and blues. On the small kitchen table, my laptop was open, streaming the morning news on mute. The chyron flashed red. Senator indicted on 47 counts of human trafficking and racketeering. The image on the screen showed my former boss being led into a federal courthouse, looking gray and diminished, stripped of the power I had spent a decade building for him. My name scrolled past in the ticker. Former strategist cooperates with DOJ. But it didn't sting. I was barred from political consulting for life. I was a pariah in D.C., and I had never slept better. I turned away from the screen, the steam from the coffee curling around my fingers. The bedroom door creaked open, and Quinn stepped out. She wasn't wearing the emerald velvet suit or the sharp armor of the investigative journalist. She was wearing one of my oversized t-shirts and wool socks, her hair a messy knot on top of her head. In the soft, gray morning light, she didn't look like a disruption. She looked like home. She walked over to me, her movements slow and sleepy, and wrapped her arms around my waist from behind. She rested her chin on my shoulder, peering at the laptop screen. "He looks tired," she murmured, her voice rough with sleep. "He looks guilty," I corrected. I leaned back into her, savoring the solid warmth of her body against mine. "The plea deal was rejected. He's going away for a long time. And you?" She kissed the sensitive spot just below my ear, sending a familiar shiver down my spine. "Do you miss it? The war room, the adrenaline, the feeling that you're the only person in the room who knows what's actually happening?" I thought about it. I thought about the vibration of the phone at 3 a.m., the taste of bile, the constant, suffocating pressure to spin lies into gold. Then I looked at the small, messy apartment. I looked at the stack of notes on the counter where Quinn was outlining her book, the true story of the corruption we had exposed. I looked at the rain against the glass. "I miss the expense account," I said, turning in her arms to face her. "But I don't miss the person I had to be to keep it." Quinn smiled, that slow, genuine smile that never failed to wreck me. Her hand slid up my back, resting on my neck, her thumbs tracing the pulse that hammered there just for her. The connection between us wasn't the frantic, dangerous spark of the hotel bar anymore. It was a steady burn, grounded in trust and the shared scar tissue of survival. "Good," she whispered, "because I like this version better. The unemployed version? The honest version." She pulled me closer, eliminating the space between us. The one who burned an empire down, just to keep me safe. "I'd do it again," I said, and I meant it. The career was dead, buried under the weight of the truth we had unleashed. But the life I had now, this quiet, tactile reality of coffee and rain and Quinn's skin against mine, was worth every lost title. She kissed me then, deep and unhurried, tasting of sleep and promise. It was a confirmation that we had survived the fall. We weren't falling anymore. We had landed. The phone on the counter buzzed, vibrating against the cheap laminate. It was a restricted number. 6 months ago, that sound would have stopped my heart. It would have meant a crisis, a scandal, a fire to put out. I didn't even look at it. I reached out, blindly, and silenced the call, turning all my attention back to the woman in my arms. The screen went dark, ghosting the past. Power isn't about controlling the narrative or winning the news cycle. It's about who you wake up next to when the story finally ends. If you've ever had to burn your world down to find the right person, hit subscribe and tell me your story in the comments.